in 2015, Brian had sort of ridden the wave of the group and had sort of caught up with us after just 300K or so, right? And so we thought, okay, well, if you can catch up from B, then you can maybe catch up from E as well. And by the way, one thing I noticed on all these rides is that there's a certain advantage. If you have a C nameplate and you catch up to someone with an A nameplate, there's like a power dynamic there.
Definitely.
That's immediate, and it's weird and subtle and kind of mean. I mean, I don't know, but like we thought, okay, we'll have E nameplates. He'll be really hardcore, and it backfired on us because the people in the E group somehow were just not motivated.
Exactly.
And Brian and I are like, we have to get to the front, and so he and I just spent, the first, I think 100 or 150K in the wind, trying to get this group to go. Yeah. And then we'd look back and they'd just be detached, and then we just, the two of us, rotating. And then the rest of the group would just be like behind us and notice the pulls, and it was frustrating.
Today we have Max, who now lives in Zurich, but is originally from Italy. Max started randonneuring in Boston in 2003. He then moved west, first to Davis, California, then to San Francisco. He first rode with the Davis Bike Club and then the San Francisco Randonneurs. He moved back to Europe 7 years ago. Here in SF, he's known for many feats, but perhaps his biggest legacy will be the adventure series that he established in 2013. It's a full brevet series with each ride featuring mixed terrain and some of the most beautiful scenery in Northern California. He has attempted PBP 4 times, starting with a DNF in 2007, then coming back with 3 Charly Miller times in 2015, 2019, and 2023. If you're not familiar with Charly Miller, he was an American who completed PBP in a time of 56 hours and 40 minutes way back in 1901. Since then, beating his time has become known as a Charly Miller. You need to average 13.6 miles per hour or 21.9 kilometers per hour, including stops, to beat the 56 hour and 40 minute time. Finally, if you wait until the end, Max will offer us his 3 tips to completing PBP in a fast time. I just want to do something slightly different today because I personally am fascinated by your adventure stories. I just want to start asking you a few questions about that.
So when I first moved to San Francisco, one of the people that I cycled with was a friend of mine called David Strong, who was an active randonneur back then, and he knew a lot of back roads in Northern California. So on weekends, we would leave San Francisco, head into Marin, Sonoma, and sometimes we would drive, and we'd go to places like King Ridge, these kind of more remote places. I was really struck, coming from the East Coast, which is also beautiful, but sort of less spectacular, less in your face, if you will. I was really fell in love with these places. And over the next couple of years, I also discovered some organized rides in these places. There's a pretty well-known Bay Area rider, Miguel Crawford from Sebastopol, who organized this thing called the Grasshopper Adventure Series, which is a bunch of sort of low-key races. I mean, a raced ride, somewhat competitive. Lots of very strong riders show up for them, in Sonoma and Mendocino. And I participated in a few of these. And it sort of occurred to me, why not create a ride where you ride to the ride instead of, driving to Sebastopol or to Mendocino or wherever else, right?
Yeah.
And so once you have that idea, then it's pretty natural to the brevet the course almost shapes itself.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. And then how many people have actually completed the entire series? Are you aware? It's very few, am I right?
It's a roughly small number. And, there's a friend of mine, who unfortunately passed away some years ago, Roy Ross. He was sort of famous for, ever since the inception of the full series. I should add, by the way, that, the series have grew incrementally. So I think the first ride that, we formed in Brevet was the old Cazadero 300. And I think the first edition of that, I'm fuzzing up, I think it was either 2010 or 2011.
Yeah.
Right. And, I was very it was important to me to sort of develop this ride entirely sort of by human power. I didn't
Yeah.
want to like drive out there to scout the route. And so scouting the routes actually took some time. It would be sort of one season per ride for me to like explore the roads and see if they were feasible and so on. And so, so it wasn't until 2013 the full series became available. And then, Roy basically rode the whole series every year, which was pretty amazing. I mean, I certainly didn't do that. To answer your question, I'm not sure exactly of the every year I actually purchase these medals that I've designed, for the people who complete the full series that year. And I'd say in an average year, there's maybe 2 or 3 people to do that.
Yeah.
So
That's so cool. I think it's lovely that it's now named after Roy, by the way. It's so fitting. Personally, I'm going to try to do as much of the series next year. I've only ever done the 300, I think. Anyway, Max, back to why we were really here. Okay, so my normal first question is, what does completing PBP mean to you?
Yeah, we all have sort of identities, right? Like, I'm a father, I'm an engineer, and I'm certainly, cycling is part of my identity. I sort of identify as a cyclist. And, PBP is such a big part of cycling history. It's, I guess at this point, the longest continuously run, timed event, right? First a race, now it's amateur, randonneur event. And so when you complete that, you sort of feel like you're part of this larger tradition. And I mean, I find that very, satisfying. And just a nice feeling to be part of that larger family. And then, of course, there's also just the athletic challenge. I think competing it, no matter what you finish in time, I think is just an achievement.
And how did it feel maybe the first time you finished, you got past that finish line? I know that was kind of your second time, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. So in 2007, I had this DNF, which I can talk more about if you like. And it was pretty disappointing. I was, sort of stunned for a long time. And so but the immediate feeling when I finished in 15 was just relief. I was like, oh, I got it. I don't have to think about this anymore. And then a few hours later, I was like, wow, it's amazing that we sort of did it in such a fast time. I mean, of course, many people finish it faster even than that time, but I was pretty satisfied with my time. So relief and satisfaction.
That's cool. Maybe we can just take a step back and talk about your background in cycling. Why do you ride? How does it make you feel?
Yeah. So, I think first and foremost, I think of cycling as transportation. That aspect of urban cycling is really important to me. For environmental reasons, for sort of urbanism reasons, in the fire cities. There's also cycling has always been something that has kind of given me peace. It's sort of helped me relax, helped me think. It's kind of a meditative thing.
Yeah.
It's of course also a good way to sort of stay in shape, your whole life. And there's also, as an engineer, I really appreciate the bicycle for its elegance, like it's, with a car, you have a huge amount of machinery that moves, this very small payload, right? And on a bicycle, the ratios are sort of reversed. And I find that really, one of my sort of mentors in grad school was always talking about economy of mechanism and sort of design, and I find that aspect of the bicycle really elegant and sort of intriguing.
So true. Do you remember your first time on a bike, Max?
I can't say that I remember my very first time, but I was very fortunate in that my dad ran a lumber business. So there was a sawmill, kind of the sort of work area of the sawmill, and then it was surrounded by forests. Yeah. And so I would and we lived essentially just adjacent to the grounds. And so when I was a little kid, I remember I had a BMX. Yeah. And then I also had access to my grandfather's old bike, which was this sort of very upright kind of Dutch bike with rod brakes, sort of rigid rod brakes. And of course all the roads around there were gravel. And so, riding one of these Dutch bikes with rod brakes as a little kid on loose gravel, there were some gnarly crashes, but it also taught me a lot. Like, so as an adult, I was sort of always very comfortable, riding off road on a road bike. Like, it was just not a big deal. I have very nice cycling memories as a kid.
How did you originally hear about PBP?
So I was living in Boston. I moved from Italy to Boston to study, and I was part of this small group of friends. We sort of do, joyrides on weekends, 50 miles, 60 miles, nothing super long. And, Boston had the distinction of, at the time, having, I think, the only 1200K in North America, which was Boston, Montreal, Boston.
Okay, yeah.
And so, and unlike PBP, it was run annually, except on the years of PBP when they were not running. And so there was sort of a kind of a local mystique about 1200Ks.
Yeah.
And, there were kind of local, like online bulletin boards, their mailing lists will sort of hear you'd read these ride reports, people, riding like nonstop for 600K,
Crazy.
and it was really, really crazy. Like it, at the time to me, it just seemed completely insane. It was like, how do these people do it,
Yeah.
And, that there were, that there was also, there was a local woman who's now a good friend of mine, Melinda Lyon. And, she's quite a famous randonneur, quite an accomplished randonneur. In 1999, she was the fastest female finisher of PBP.
Wow.
And so, like her name was sort of, you sort of find it in these ride reports and so on, right? It just seemed like extremely impressive. And that's how I first heard about it. And then I was doing a lot of riding with this friend of mine, Chip Coldwell. And in 2003, which is a PBP year, we decided to just try the relay series.
Wow.
And I ended up not finishing the 400K. I got a stomach bug, but I still remember very clearly.
Yeah.
I remember where I was when the stomach bug
Yeah.
hit. But Chip actually finished the series that year. He decided to ride PBP. And so then, then I had his sort of, first person kind of story.
That's so cool.
That I heard when he came back.
Max, did you ever actually end up doing the Boston, Montreal, Boston thing?
Yes, I actually did it twice in 2004 and then 2006. That was actually, I mentioned my friend David, who kind of taught me the roads around, Occidentals, Sonoma, Marin. I actually met him on one of the Boston, Montreal, Boston rides. Like he had come up from California to do the ride.
That's so cool. So then you kind of said, well, I want to do PBP. How did you figure out how you would approach PBP?
It was 2007. We had actually just had our first child.
Okay.
My wife gave birth in January of the PBP year.
Yeah.
And so, and I was also actually that year changing jobs.
Yes.
And we were moving, we moved from Davis to the Bay Area. It was like a little bit confusing. But I didn't really have a super sophisticated plan. I sort of just, every free minute that I got, I just went riding.
Okay.
And there were a few months before we actually moved to San Francisco when we were living in Berkeley. We were like renting this little place in Berkeley. And basically I would just go up the Berkeley Hills. Like, I'd go out the door and just like, straight up, I'm blanking on the name of the road now, but like, there were a few that I would just do regularly. And that was, in the end, I think, good training.
Oh, that's cool. And so 2007, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that actual event, maybe even just getting there and things like that. And you obviously just had a newborn. Did your wife come with you, for example, with the newborn, or she stayed in California?
No, she did not come to Paris. Yeah. But she was very generous with letting me just like fly to
She sounds generous, by the way. Okay.
Yes, I think she's had 2 decades of patience at this point. Not just for cycling, by the way, also like ski touring and mountaineering.
Okay.
But so in 2007, I'd only been in California for a year. I'd sort of met some people that didn't know the cycling scene that well, and I was still very attached to my old cycling friends in Massachusetts. And so I actually sort of arranged to meet this, group of people that I had known, from the years cycling in Massachusetts, including my friend Chip, who had done it in 2003. And so we all met up in Paris. And the only thing missing was my bike. Because I had flown British Airways, so it was San Francisco to London and then London to Paris. And I arrived with, I had planned it so that I'd be able to kind of adjust to the time zone and so forth. Yeah. And so I arrived, I think, 3 days early. And every day they told me, oh yeah, we'll deliver your bike this evening or something,
Stress. Oh,
Yeah. And in the end, it never happened. So what happened with my bike ultimately is that they found it under a pile of lost luggage at Heathrow in October. And they sent it back to me in a box, and like both wheels were tacoed, and it was to their credit, they did also write me a nice check.
okay.
So that was fine, but I did have my bike. And in the end, I also, because I was stressed, I wasn't really sleeping very well. I was jet lagged. I was anxious about the ride. I didn't have my bike.
Yeah.
I wasn't sleeping very well. And, the morning of the event, I think the start was actually on a Monday, if I remember correctly. I'm not 100% sure. It's either Sunday or Monday. And it was supposed to be in the evening. And so that morning, I just went to a bike shop and I was like, I need a bike. And the biggest bike they had was a Cannondale Synapse that was like, I think it was at the 54 or 55 centimeter.
And you were a tall man, Max, isn't that right? Like, you were pretty tall, aren't you?
I'm coming up, about 6'5". So I usually ride, I ride whatever the biggest frame manufacturer makes. For Cannondale, it's usually like a 62 or something. My steel frame was technically a 64.
Wow.
And so I was like, well, whatever, let's just have an extra tall, speed to with a longer stem. And so I really looked, I looked like Shotgun Cancellara or something. I was like, my hands were like very front.
Yeah.
And I was so happy. I was so excited that I had this bike. And so the first maybe 100 or 200K, like none of my friends could like hold my wheel. I was just like out front, just hammering,
Yeah.
And I really wasn't thinking very clearly. It was not a smart, approach to the ride. And so, then it started raining, and for those who've done PBP a few times, 2007 is sort of almost legendary in its bad weather. I mean, it was raining for hours and hours nonstop, and it was pretty cold. And so, I was out of this very aggressive position, so already my hands were kind of numb, and just from the position, right?
Yeah.
But on top of that, you get the cold rain, and I just really like. At some point I was like almost delirious from like pain and Chip actually stuck with me for, all the way to Brest. He was like, yeah, I'll help you out. I'll pace you. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
But I got to Brest and I just felt so terrible. I was like, I really could not go on, and so I just threw in the towel. And I took TGV, back to Paris. And I was really bummed about that.
Max, you don't strike me as the type that gives up easily. So it probably was a real emotional struggle to throw in the towel. Was it?
It was, I mean, I just felt, I don't know, it's hard to, it's also been a long time now, 17 years ago, but I sort of have these memories of lying on a gym mat in the Brest control, and just being in such like whole body pain that I just couldn't conceive of like going further. I just couldn't do it, and the volunteers were all like, yeah, get up, courage, but I was like, no, not courage. It was a bad scene.
And then, like, I always think, as males in particular, when we don't finish something, it has this outweighed impact on our psyche. It makes no sense in my mind. Was that your experience? Like 6 months later, you were still cursing in the shower?
I mean, I'm not sure if it's like males specifically, but certainly some of the personality types. And for me, it was definitely like that. Like, I mean, it wasn't just like 6 months later. It was like, 7 years later, I was, so
17 years later. Good. Yeah.
No. Now it's over.
Okay. That's good. So then actually, can I ask, was the attempt your first attempt? Were you going for time as well, or not really? Did that matter?
Not really.
Yeah.
It didn't really matter. I wanted, this Boston group that I was with, these friends of mine, we had done many, many brevets as a group over the previous years. And we were always quite fast. We would do like 400K in 15 hours. We did BMB in about, Boston on Trail Boston in about 60.
Wow.
Right. So I sort of hoped, I was okay, we'll do Paris in like, a pretty fast time. And in fact, that actually is what caused me to sign up for the 80-hour group.
Okay.
And I think maybe if I had been in the 90-hour group and had those extra 10 hours of buffer, maybe I would have just like slept for a few hours in Brest and kept going, but
Yeah.
at that point, I just didn't feel I had the cushion.
Cool. So then let me get this right. So we go fast forward to 2015, which is 8 years
Yeah.
later. Is that right? Did I get that
Yeah.
right? 8 years
Yes,
later,
that's,
you've been stewing for 8 years and you were going to
that's right.
do this again. Did you go in with that Charly Miller mindset or?
Yes.
Okay. And can
Yes.
I ask, because you're European, right? And Charly Miller is a very American kind of thing. Any thoughts about that? There's lots of people around the world who have completed PBP in a time less than Charly Miller, but they don't even know Charly Miller exists. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, all these goals are arbitrary in some way, right?
Yeah.
You can set the boundary at 56 hours instead of the 50, at 55 or 40. I spent, so far I've spent more than half of my life in the US.
Yeah.
I was there for 27 years.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm a US citizen. I have double nationality.
Yeah.
Cool. And so I was like, well, the thing exists. I will climb this mountain.
Cool. So then for 2015, I suspect the number one goal was getting your bicycle to Paris. That was important to you, your actual bicycle.
Yes, I flew around.
Okay, very good. So how did what was the training like? Was it different in many ways?
Yeah, I mean, it was 8 more years of rando.
Yeah, wow.
And, the California, when I was living in New England, the weather is very different from California. And so there's 2 brevet series, at the time at least, there were 2 brevet series in Massachusetts, one in the east, one in the west. And I would do like 1.5 brevet series. And during kind of my peaks, randonneuring years of 2013, 2014, I mean, there were a couple of years when I did 4 full brevet series, right?
Yeah.
And so, you could come to PBP with a lot of miles in your legs. And those are also the years when I was doing a lot of scouting up north to design the adventure series and so on. And I'm sure, you and many of your listeners know Jan Heine, the author of The Vice of the Quarterly, right?
Yeah.
And around 2009, 2010, he had come up with this idea of the R60, R70, R80, right? This notion of doing a full brevet series in 60, 70, 80% of maximum having limit.
Okay.
And so a few of us in the Bay Area, starting in 2010, always tried to do an R60 brevet series. And so I think I did that in 2010, 2011. I think I did 2 of them in 2015. And so, an R60 time at Paris Brest would be 54 hours. So I guess I went into the 2015 PBP feeling pretty confident that I had done multiple 600Ks in, R60 time. I'm like, well, it's a stretch, but it's not crazy.
Yeah. Did you go with a team of people? Like you had some friends you were going to work together on that first 2015, second one, I should say.
So I had done a lot of riding with Carl Anderson and Brian Kilgore. I know, you interviewed Brian recently.
Yeah.
And so we kind of had a plan to ride together.
Yeah.
It was a little bit disrupted. So Carl and I both ended up in the A wave in 2015. I think Brian basically did the registration just a little bit late and all the A slots had been exhausted. And so then he ended up in the B wave, which starts 15 minutes later. And so, we were a little bit worried about how that dynamic would pan out. But that was sort of the plan. Certainly Carl and I were hoping to ride the
And just a general question, like riding by yourself versus with a team, like there's advantages and disadvantages to both. What's your preference, first of all?
Oh, definitely riding with people.
Okay. And then how do you kind of manage the ups and downs of other people? Because that can be stressful, I would imagine.
Yeah. I've got to tell you, it actually hasn't been that stressful.
Okay.
Like I guess I've been fortunate. My riding partners, that they've always been nice to me.
Yeah. Okay.
And I try hard to be nice to people, right? Like you kind of develop this, you're kind of in it together. and you try to have each other's back. You know, I guess that it's just, I've always felt that, if I'm generous with others, they will be generous with me, and like things just work out, right? And, sometimes it happens that maybe someone is like feeling really badly, or they're like, they have some kind of injury and they can't go at a certain speed or what have you, right? And then, my philosophy there is to wait for a very long time before splitting.
Okay.
Right. And to not split unless it's really obvious that the person is just like, is not going to be recovering, and either needs to be enough or just like finish at a very different pace or something.
Yeah. I suspect though, for things like that, you need a lot of communication. Am I right? Like, you just kind of set some rules maybe going into the team environment, or not really?
I mean, I don't remember ever having a conversation being like, hey guys, these are the rules, right? I think that there is a kind of an understanding of, we will help each other, we'll stick together.
Yeah.
At the same time, if someone is really, really struggling, the others sort of have the freedom at some point to just move on, and it's okay. Like, no one's going to be blaming you, right?
Yeah. Cool. So, go ahead.
I should add, by the way, that, some difference definitely, with people that I've cycled a lot with and that I know really well, like Brian or like Chip Coldwell or Carl, that's, you go into the event like with that trust. You're like, I know that, Brian isn't going to like abandon me if I have a problem, or Chip won't abandon me. Right? And neither will I then, right? But as I say, one of the things that I really like about rando actually is that a lot of times that happens even with random people, right? So, on this last week in 2023, I met some, riders from Germany who I met them on the road while cycling, right? And over the miles, that dynamic kind of forms where, like, if one person is having a problem, the others just stop, right? And that's very different from like the attitude in a race, right? Where, if the person's slowing down, then you try to drop them, right? And that's one reason why I actually like randonneuring and I'm not particularly keen on cycle racing.
Makes sense. So getting back to 2015, anything else you want to add before I ask you what it was like to reach the finish line?
One thing that I want to mention is the A-wave start, which was absolutely insane.
Oh, God. Yes.
It was actually, I think it was probably like the sketchiest thing I've ever done on a bicycle.
Yeah.
We were going so fast. I had a power meter, and I was just trying to like keep up with these like kind of bursts that were happening at the front of the group. And I would look down at my power meter, and it would say like 800 watts, just for briefly. I was like, this is insane. We have to ride 750 miles and I'm burning these matches, right?
Yeah.
And then at the time, that was the last year that the ride actually started in San Francisco Randonneurs, which is, much more urban than the current Rambouillet start.
Yeah.
And so when you leave San Quentin, there's several kilometers of kind of, road furniture, rotaries, and sort of difficult French urban landscape. And like 2 or 3 times I just see these like insane crashes, where someone just like, hits the lip of a road divider or something, and they just go down and people go up on, and these would be like ride ending crashes.
Yeah.
Right? And of course no one's stopping them. You look behind, you're like, okay, I survived that. I just keep going.
Yeah.
And it was pretty terrifying.
Wow. Like, just the thought, like I often think about, I've never done Charly Miller, for example, but just the thought of doing something for 54 hours, there must be a lot of anxiety. But then you throw the danger aspect in, that first kind of 27 hours to Brest. It must be scary.
I don't think it's that. It was really just the start. It was at the first 20 or 30 kilometers.
Okay.
And the way that I think about this is probably that, all these people were training for, at least a year, and now you're there, and, the level of adrenaline is just off the charts. And I think people just make stupid decisions, and of course, I also made it, but they try and keep up with that. Of course, I was also making a stupid decision. Right? It's very hard to disentangle yourself from that sort of herd mentality.
Definitely. Yeah. As you say, like the start line, the start happens. People have been training for many years. You were bringing in your own emotional stuff from 8 years before. Like it's a lot, you know?
Yep.
So maybe anything else? Otherwise, let's talk about the finish for 2007 and 15. It must have felt good.
You know, it was, in some ways, it was kind of a charmed ride. You know, I mean, literally the only, aside from the crazy start, like literally the only bad thing that happened to us was that, you know, Brian's chain link. You know, his chain sort of snapped in two twice, I think. Or which I still tease. I just like to tease him about it. It wasn't that serious, but yeah. But when that's the biggest like problem you have on the ride, you know, you're having a good ride, and so those last miles, I remember it was sort of dusk. I think the sun had gone down, but the sky was still, you know, light, and it had sort of these nice kind of deep pink colors, and you know, because the finish was closer to Paris, there were these kind of big streets, you know, big, long, straight avenues that were well paved. Yes, we were going in flats. We were just going quite fast still. And then there was this last little stretch where you're on this sort of bike path somehow to get to the velodrome in San Quentin. And I just remember getting onto this gravel path and knowing that we were literally, you know, a kilometer from the finish. And it just felt unreal. I was like, wow, you know, I can walk to the finish now, and I would still make it in an amazing time, you know, and it was just it felt very peaceful. Sort of.
I can imagine. Yeah. Like, again, I've never done Charly Miller. Like, does it feel for those 54 hours, whatever it is, like it's a constant, I gotta just keep moving, can't lose time? Is there a huge urgency?
You know, I personally don't really feel it. Where I feel urgency is at the control.
Okay.
Because, you know, PBP has on the order of a dozen controls, right? And so if you spend, you know, half an hour at each control, that's 6 hours off the bike.
Yeah.
If you spend 15 minutes at the control, then you have sage 3 hours. And so usually when I get to the control, you know, even before getting there and the miles approaching the control, you start talking with your partners, like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
You know, how long are we going to stop for? You know, and you sort of think, you know, you really learn into your head, okay, I have to like get the card stamped, you know, run to the water station, get a sandwich, run back to your bike, you know, get out your reflective gear because it's going to be nightfall or something, right? And I really tried hard to sort of think through all those steps and kind of repeat them, because once you get to the control, things are chaotic and you really have to just follow that, you know. But other than that, and then the other thing that's, I think, where you feel the pressure is probably the first 300K. So both in 20, I guess all 3 times, I guess, that I've done UP. The first 300K are, if I got to Fougères, are basically the fastest 300Ks that I've ridden. You know, like 9 hours basically, right? Because you're in these big pelotons, you know, the road is sort of gently rolling and you just really hammer it, you know, average speed like 34 or something. And so there you sort of feel the pressure. You say, okay, if I lose this wheel or if I use this group, then I'm going to be like 2 hours slower, right? But once things sort of calm down, then I actually, again, depends on the edition and exactly how things are going, but often it's actually quite being on a bike tour, you know, kind of like a fast bike tour.
Yeah.
It's not that stressful.
And Max, tell me about sleep on that first one. Did you sleep the first time?
If I recall correctly, we slept for something like half an hour in Loudéac on the way back. And it was really gridly, you know, how there were, because at that point, if you're fast and you're coming back, now you're meeting the bulge of the outbound routers. And as I remember getting into the little cafeteria, at first you get through that and all the racks, there was like hundreds, maybe thousands of bikes, right? So first you're like, wow, how do I even park my bike in such a way that I can then find it again? And then you go into this sort of, you know, cafeteria area, and there were people just like strewn out on the floor everywhere, like, you know, just like asleep in the craziest positions, you know. And we just did that and just found a table that, you know, already had people under it sleeping. And we just like went under ourselves, and it was silky, the floor was all slippery and nasty.
Yeah.
But you're so exhausted, you're like, yeah, I'm just going to sleep half an hour.
And again,
Yeah.
it's that communication, though. You said that to your two teammates. Okay, we have 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you got to get up.
Something like that, yeah.
And can you
There's
actually recover? Does it help in recovery to sleep for 30 minutes?
I think so.
Okay.
I think, when you first wake up, when the alarm rings, you feel the worst that you've ever felt.
Yeah.
But then, you have a drink of water or a hot coffee or something.
Yeah.
And then very quickly, you feel much better than you did before you fell asleep.
Yeah, makes sense. It does make sense. So then maybe let's talk about those two subsequent times, 2019 and 23. Anything you want to comment on there? Maybe the starting group as well. I think you had some comments about that.
Yeah, so the starter groups, after the terror experience in 2015, I was like, okay, I don't want to do A again. And so then Brian and I actually, then Brian and I had, from months before, decided we were going to try to ride this together again.
Okay.
And we decided to go for E, which was I think it would be the last or the penultimate of the 80-hour groups.
Yeah.
And because we thought, if in 2015, Brian had sort of ridden the wave of the group and had sort of caught up with us after just 300K or so, right? And so we thought, okay, well, if you can catch up from B, then you can maybe catch up from E as well. And, by the way, one thing I noticed on all these rides is that there's a certain advantage. If you have a C nameplate and you catch up to someone with an A nameplate, there's like a power dynamic there.
Definitely.
That's immediate, and it's weird and subtle and kind of mean. I mean, I don't know, but we thought, okay, we'll have E nameplates. He'll be really hardcore. And it backfired on us because the people in the E group somehow were just not motivated.
Exactly.
And Brian and I are like, yeah, we have to get to the front, And so he and I just spent, the first, I think 100 or 150K in the wind, trying to get this group to go.
Yeah.
And then we'd look back and they'd just be detached. And then we just, the two of us, rotating. And then the rest of the group would just be like behind us and notice the pulls, And it was frustrating. And so then in 2023, I read Goldilocks. I said, okay, we'll do D as in boy.
Okay.
And that actually was great. It was a very fast group, but didn't have any of the terror aspects of the A in 2015. Also, I should add that, moving the start to Rambouillet, there's that very first section right after you leave the chateau, where there's cobblestones for a few dozen meters.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, you're on nice roads, and they're just country roads. There's no road furniture, there's no dividers or anything. And so I think that also just makes things a lot more stunning.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think in the future, B or C are probably my
sort of proximity to A, but not A. Okay, that's important.
A, yeah.
And anything else you want to talk about for those two subsequent Charly Millers from your first Charly Miller? Anything else about those years?
Well, the two rides were very different for me personally. I think everyone, of course, experiences differently. In 2019, I think all of us had some like I said, in 2019, the original goal that Brian and I had was to break 50 hours, right? And I think we were just cocky. And I think in terms of fitness, we certainly could have done it actually, right? But you also need luck, right? You need everything to really go well.
Yeah.
And in 2019, I had some gut issues. And Brian, if I'm blank, I'm a little bit fuzzy now. I should have done better research part of this interview, but I think he actually had some like knee issues.
Okay.
And we were actually riding with my friend Chip, so it was sort of like a bi-coastal Charly Miller attempt.
Yeah.
And Chip also, I think, at some point developed knee issues.
Yeah.
And so all of us, I had antacid, but I was popping, and they were popping ibuprofen, and it's like a rolling pharmacy, you know. And in the end, we finished in a good time, sub 55, but it was very hard. And I got to the finish, and I remember feeling it in finish, like really, like I was done. I couldn't go another stop. It was over for me,
Yeah.
And by contrast, in 2023. I just had a magical ride. I always tell people that it was sort of like a state of grace.
Amazing.
I don't expect that to ever happen again. I mean, I think it would be crazy to expect that to happen again. But basically, except for one time in the first night when I slightly nodded off, like there was some fog and I was having trouble seeing. And I remember like kind of nodding off and Brian being like, Max, wake up, and then I kind of was like, oh, right. But aside from that one incident, I can't remember ever having trouble on that ride. Like I was always riding within my, and by contrast, Brian, that ride really suffered, and we ended up separating in Fougères, I think, on the return. So I did the last 300K by myself.
Yeah. And we kind of touched on that, but I am very interested in that because, you have to leave your teammate, and that must be hard then, Max. Is it like there's guilt, I'm sure, all these things, or you tell me, like, how do you eventually say, Brian is in pain. He needs to, go slower or whatever.
I mean, so all of us have ups and downs, right? Yeah. And you have to be elastic about that, right? He initially, actually, even towards the end of the first afternoon, he started having some dehydration issues, and then those passed. But then as we were approaching Brest, we really, started developing this knee pain, right? And then on the way back from Brest, on those big hills as you come back from Brest, that's where it was, really evident that he was having trouble. I think, I guess my philosophy was, the first thing is let's make sure that Brian is safe, basically, right? And that he's not like, unable to move somewhere in the middle of the French countryside or something, right? It was interesting. For several hours, we had kind of, Brian and I would be riding, and Chip was not Ruki, he was at home in Boston.
Okay.
And I was asking him to like, over WhatsApp while riding, I was texting through him being like, hey, can you like Google these symptoms, or like, how much ibuprofen is like the limit for the day or whatever, right? And at some point, Chip, like, Brian has had too much ibuprofen. No more ibuprofen for Ryan.
That's funny.
Yes. But then once you got to Fougères is the control. It's like 300, or maybe it was Tantignac. At that point, I was feeling, we were way behind pace, but we were not going to be Charly Miller. But I still felt fantastic. I mean, I felt fresh. Like I said, it was an incredible ride for me. And so I thought, okay, I can probably, ride at like 18 miles an hour to the finish from here and, make Charly Miller if I start now.
Yeah.
And so Brian and I just had this conversation, right? It wasn't like, hey, Brian, I'm leaving. I was like, hey, Brian, is it okay if I leave, right? And I think Brian generously was like, sure, I'll ride my ride, you ride yours, right? And so those last 350K, I was also lucky that a friend of mine here from Switzerland, this guy called Christoph, he happened to, we had sort of been very close, but not riding together for a lot of the ride. We were sort of hopscotching each other.
Yes.
And we happened to sort of converge on Tantignac, together.
Yeah.
And so then he and Brian and I left together, and Brian was like, but I'll hang on as long as I can.
Yeah. And
basically the first climb out of town, Brian was like, well, my knee can't do it. And so then we sort of had this, like kind of farewell. And like in the moment, it feels terrible. You can look back, your buddy's like kind of crawling behind, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I sort of felt that I had done the responsible thing, and he seemed okay with it. And I guess I wanted to use my chance to see whether I could do this again.
No, makes complete sense. I just actually have a question about just the people of Brittany in general. Do they support you along the way? You tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what makes, I think, PBP different from, a lot of other revés, is that, the sort of popular passion for this event. I think for cycling in general, right? There's lots of, French road racing champions, right, that come from Brittany and Normandy. So that there's a tradition of cycling up there. But PBP certainly is kind of incredible. And you fly into this some village in the middle of nowhere, probably has 1,000 inhabitants or something. And at 2 a.m, and there's people out there, cheering you on with they're like offering you wine as you ride by or whatever, and cowbells or what have you. And that's just unique. And it's hard to, just talking about it, it's very difficult to convey kind of how emotional it can feel, with the sort of the enthusiasm and the support, especially if you're sort of going hard and like you feel it's just amazing. It's like an incredible mind space.
It must be kind of slightly different being at the pointy end, right? Because you're the first groups to come into many of these villages, right? So that I bet is really special.
I think so. I mean, some people come in hours before us, but yes, it's sort of a trickle, right? But typically we'll be in the first 50 or 100 people to go to a place. Yeah.
Max, anything else you want to say about PBP before I ask you the $1 million question? If we'll see you again in 3 years' time.
I think I've probably said a lot already.
Okay.
I don't want
to. That's great. Perfect. No, it's been great. All right. So here's the question: will we see you again in whatever is 2027?
I think so.
Okay.
I think for the reason that I just said, I think the general atmosphere, and it's sort of a party on wheels. It's really somehow it just has a special feel.
And obviously, you'll try for a fast time again. Is that the strategy, you think?
I think so. I don't like to jinx it.
Okay, I understand.
I think I think the only time when I went out and said, and actually was telling people with Charly Miller was 2019, which of course was the slowest of the Renaissance.
That's funny. So at some point, you may end up slowing up in general. Do you think you're going to continue doing this event for many, many, many years to come?
I would like to. Well, first of all, living in Europe, and then my family and I, we're sort of bicontinental. My wife's family is primarily in California. My family is in Europe. Right now we live here, and it's 4 hours by train from Zurich to Paris. Right? So it's a very it's a very cheap thing to sign up for, essentially. It doesn't have any of the logistics hurdles that an American randonneur from the US needs to follow. So I would like to do it. On the other hand, sometimes I have to say that sometimes I do wonder about the wisdom of night riding.
Okay.
In the last few years, there's been some accidents kind of in my life.
Oh, right. So I heard about that one, by the way. You hit a badger. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I hit a badger. I broke my femur pretty badly. It was a tough rehab. But also, actually I lost a couple of friends, to car accidents, one here in Switzerland and one from the San Francisco Randonneurs. There's just been, other lightning-related deaths, of course, and in the Bay Area that, people that I knew. And so that all makes me, pause. On the other hand, cycling and randonneuring specifically, it's been a big part of my life. I have many friends, in the sport and in the that I've met on past rides and so on, right? And so I think, one year I chose not to participate, and then August came around and I saw everyone riding.
I know.
I'd be sad.
Exactly. Okay. Just on that question, not you personally, but how late in life do you think someone can keep doing PBP?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's really a difference in PBP and any other, long ride, right? Whether it's, one of the US 1200s or London Underground or whatever. I think the oldest finishes at PBP each year are in their 80s?
Mid-80s,
Mid-80s, right? I think, I think a lot of it is luck,
Yeah,
like sort
I
of
agree.
like there's genetic luck, and then there's also just luck of, not getting hit by a truck or
Yeah,
whatever, right?
or
And
Tesla. Okay, good. Cool. All right, Max. So we're going to end it by asking you what 3 tips you'd offer someone who wants to do PBP in a fast time.
sure. So I think, and by the way, I've seen some of your past videos, and I think there's lots of great tips in there in any case.
Yeah.
But one that I would certainly emphasize is, if you want to go fast, is to do kind of high intensity training.
Good.
I think that when the randonneuring, often there's really an emphasis on just miles, right? And, people coming to BP having done, 8,000 miles in the previous, 8 months or something, right? And I think that that's fine, but that in terms of benefit per hour and even just overall benefit, you're really well served by high intensity training. My personal experience is in 2023, I went into PBP with fewer than half of the miles that I had in 2019. But I had done a lot of, I was doing a lot of rowing, and still also currently doing a lot of rowing.
Yeah.
And the rowing, of course, a long training will be like an hour, right? And the races are like 6 minutes.
Wow.
And so it's very much sort of geared towards VO2 max and, like kind of maximal efforts. And I found that the work on the rowing machine really translated, really well to the needs that I had on a bike. And so whenever there was an acceleration in the group or there's a steep hill or something, I just, I felt great. So that's one thing I recommend. And in general, also trying other sports, whether it's rowing or cross-country skiing or, whatever is sort of in your local environment that's available, right? I think that can be a way to sort of strengthen different muscle groups that otherwise, for example, your shoulders, which often take a lot of load, many hours in the saddle.
Yeah.
And just a way also to not be bored. I guess the second tip is nutrition, right? To really have a plan for nutrition.
Yeah.
And not to wing it. Whenever I've had bad rides like PBP 2019 or there was a Edinburgh, London 2013 where I really struggle. It's never been muscular. It's always been some digestive issue.
Yeah.
And, the way I like to think about it is if you're doing sprints, you kind of win with your muscles, right? And if you're doing middle distance, then you win with your lungs and your heart, right? And if by the time you get to random distance, you win with your stock, right? You win with the ability to just convert food into energy steadily and continuously, right? And so I personally have found a thing that works for me. I make this like homemade magic powder with like soy powder and maltodextrin.
Yeah.
It's a bit, it's not the greatest taste, but only 48 hours.
Yeah.
And I have it separated into, kind of little baggies that fill 4 bottles each. So even if one breaks, that's not a huge loss.
Yeah.
But basically, I have a plan that you've really tested prior to the ride. And then my third tip, I guess, is about mental attitude. And I'd summarize it as basically trying to be meditative or to even to meditate if possible, right? And what I mean by that is that a lot of times, mistakes or the desire to slow down and drop out or something, happen because of stress. Or you've gotten a mechanical and now you're never able to catch up. Or, the group has dropped you, or it's raining and it's cold and like, what are you going to do, right? And I feel that a lot of times, just sort of taking a few breaths and telling yourself it'll be okay and just sort of keep on keeping on,
Yeah.
If you're able to really practice that mindset, I think that goes a long way towards finishing these kind of long events.
Cool. Max, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really thank you for your time and all your insight and joining us so late from Europe. We really appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. This is a lot of fun. Great talking with you.